thanks for that. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Uh, how many of you have seen a previous CornCon talk from me? A couple of people, right? Was it on Bash? I think so. I'm just trying to remember, but I never seen this guy before. But so yeah. Is it kind of working? Oh, I guess I gotta be like super close. All right. So today I just want to do a little bit of talk. I've done a couple of talks on using Bash to do some forensic stuff. And I'm like, I did a talk on Bash forensics, and then I did another talk, like more on Bash forensics. I'm like, well, gee, what should I call this? I'm like, bashing harder. It sounds better than like part 3 of an ongoing series. So today I just wanted to talk about 2 basic things, right? So we do things like this a lot, especially with forensics. I want to find files based on their timestamps. When were they accessed, modified, created, etc. So when you're trying to find anything, you pretty much want to use a tool like find, right? I know it's really shocking. So in the world of Unix and Linux, for those of you that aren't familiar, there's kind of this philosophy. You have a ton of tools, and every tool is really good at one thing, right? So guess what find is really good at? Finding stuff, right? And so there's a bunch of criteria, and there's a lot of options to find that a lot of people don't even realize. Like, you can do a find and have it print out all of your timestamps and things like that. But today I want to talk a little bit about an option that you have, and it's called either amin, cmin, or mmin. So this is an option where you can say, I want to have files that were modified, created, or accessed this many minutes ago or more, or exactly this many minutes ago, or less than this many minutes ago. Right? So that's the first thing I want to talk about. So how does this work? You pass it a number. And if you say plus, you put a plus out front, that means more than n minutes ago. Or just nothing, no sign, means exactly this long ago, which honestly, who uses that? That just sounds a little iffy to me. And then a minus sign means less than this many minutes ago. Okay. So the first script we're going to talk about is just a really simple script I call it between. It's like you give it a date range and possibly with timestamps. And then you say, hey, I want to know the files in this starting directory that have the right timestamps for whatever I specified. Okay? So there's a little complication. This is done in minutes ago. Well, how do I go from a date to minutes ago? Well, there's a solution. I can use the date utility. Right? And the date utility, if you've never really played with it, is kind of cool. At a minimum, what will the date utility do for you? It will tell you the date. Okay? But you can also specify a date, and it even uses natural language. So, for example, I could say yesterday, 2 days ago, last Thursday, next Saturday, next week Saturday. I can even say the first Tuesday next month. it understands natural language in addition to understanding dates in standard formats. So it is a pretty powerful tool. Again, going with the Unix, Linux philosophy of, hey, let's have something that's really, really good at one thing. And date is great at doing date math. And I don't mean like romantic date math, because, most of us are out of luck in that regard. But, because we're all married. That's what I meant to say, Right. But very flexible on the input. So how do you do some date math? It's pretty simple. You convert a date and time to seconds from the epoch. That's kind of a native way that date time stamps are stored in Linux. And the epoch is, of course, January 1st, 1970, midnight GMT, or Universal Coordinated Time, depending on who you ask. So why is that date? Well, that's slightly before Unix was created, right? So we use that many seconds. So if I want to find the appropriate number of minutes, I find this time. I have a date time stamp that I've been given by the user. I'm going to convert it to seconds from the epoch. Then I create a difference, if you will, by looking at the current date, and then I just subtract, right? And then divide by 60, right? So it looks kind of like this. Hopefully, it's squeezed and a little blurry. Well, it is what it is, right? But so here, what I'm doing in the first part of this, I'm just getting the current date, and the +%s is a format specifier. Oh, that's true. That might. All right, try not to blind myself. So this is saying, hey, please give me the date in seconds from the epoch. Right? That's the format I want to output. And then I get a date. The -D says I've passed you a date. I don't want the current date and time. And it's whatever start date. That's something that was input into my script. And again, I want the same format. I subtract these two numbers and divide by 60. Okay. So there's actually a couple of little tricks, if you will, in that. I'm going to talk about those in a second. So we're going to look at this script in just a bit, but it starts out, it has a usage function. That's a pretty standard thing to do. It's good practice so that if someone runs your script with a -H, for example, it'll say, hey, this is how you use this script. Or if they give you something that doesn't make any sense, instead of just saying, go away and go read the source code for the script, you can give them a usage. I'm also using something in Bash called getops. How many of you have ever used getops before? All right, like 2 of you. Okay, so that's good. Getops, as you'll see, is a very simple way to parse command line options. Now, it's a little harder if you start doing things like saying, I want to support long options like -- something instead of just dash in one letter. But you can do it that way. I didn't do that for this script because I thought, I want to keep this simple, right? Now, the tricks. The first trick is this guy right here. If you want to run a command in a subshell in Bash, you just take a command and you put $, and then you enclose that in parentheses. And what happens with Bash is it runs that command that's in the parentheses, and whatever it returns, it just pastes it right into your script. Right? And by the way, that's not just bash. That's most of the shells in Linux that works with. And then there's this other cool trick where you double up on the parentheses. And by the way, if you're getting into shell scripting, I will tell you this. There's a lot of places where you'll double up on things like brackets, parentheses, etc. And typically, when you're doing that, it's saying, I'm going to do something that's an extension that's not necessarily part of every shell. It wasn't part of the Bourne shell way back when that was developed, right? So this particular extension allows you to do math. Okay, so let's have a look at the script real quick. Okay, so starting at the top, every good script has what? Shebang line, right? So comments in shell scripts start with a hash or a pound sign or a number sign, depending on how old you are, right? Or if you're British or not, right? British people get confused when you say, that's a pound sign. They go, no, it isn't. But you should have on the first line a special comment. It's hash and then an exclamation point, and that's defining an interpreter for this script that says, hey, please go run this program and pass every single line of this script to that program. Right? So if I fat-fingered this, and maybe there wasn't bash on the system for some reason, it would fail. And it would give me a message, bad interpreter. I don't know how to deal with this script. Right? So you might say, why would I bother? Right? Because what's the default script for most every Linux distribution? Bash is most of them. But even if that's the default script, what if your user that's running your script has their own favorite shell? Maybe they like the C shell. And they run your script, and you're like, this is garbage, it doesn't work. So this ensures that it'll work because I'm going to run the correct shell. Right? And I just got a couple comments here. All right, you completely cannot see that cursor. Apologize for that. I guess I'm going back to the laser pointer. So here we have a function. It's easy to define a function in the bash shell. You just put a name, put empty parentheses after it, put a bunch of stuff between curly brackets, and there you go. You have a function. And all this does is just echoes out how do you use this script. Right? Pretty simple stuff. By the way, unlike Python, like this indentation that I did here, that's just to make it easier to read, not required at all. If you really don't like yourself much, you could have put the entire thing on one line, right? Just put a bunch of semicolons in there and it would work. Okay, so now I want to process any options that were put in. So I define a couple of variables. The first one is called ACM. Is this going to be access, creation, or modification times? Because I need to have the right options when I call find. It's going to be -amin, -cmin, or -mmin. And then I have an action. Now, find's default action is just to print the name of a file. And that would be great if it weren't for these people in the world. We call them Windows users, all right? Windows users, what do they like to do? They like to put spaces in file names and directory names, and that totally messes you up, And that's why I have an option called -Z for please null terminate the output. Instead of putting everything one per line, put a null at the end of it, and that's useful if you're passing this to another script, right? So that's why that option exists. Okay, so how the heck do I use this get ops in bash? So I have a while loop, and I say while get ops, and I give it this string. Wow, even that string's barely legible, but it says HZ opt semicolon do. Okay, so what's that all about? Get ops will take a string, and that string says these are my options that I accept. If my option has a parameter, I put a colon after it. So the S option is the start date. It expects a parameter. So there's a colon. E, end date, expects a parameter. There's a colon. The rest of these don't have a parameter. So it's just a letter. Okay? So I have a little while loop, and it's started by the do, and then I have a switch statement, or a case statement, if you will. And I say case option, which was my variable here. By the way, if you're new to bash scripting again, if I want to refer to a variable, I just refer to it. If I want to refer to its value, I put the $sign out in front of it. And that gives me the value of that variable. So if the value is in S, if it's S, then the start date is opt arg. And you probably can't tell. Well, you can kind of tell. Those are curly brackets or braces. That's just a better way, more safe way of specifying an environment variable. Right? I don't want to get completely into that. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can ask me later. And then, okay, I've got double semicolons. That means that's the end of this case. Is it E? That takes an end date argument. And if it's C, then I change ACM to C. If it's M, I change it to M. And then the Z, I change my action for find from print to print 0. And that tells find, please give me null terminated output. Again, those pesky Windows people, right? And here I go through this little loop. And then when I'm done, I want to get the very last argument. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying shift. Now what shift does, it says take the first argument and just shift it away. And just keep doing that as many times as I call shift. I'm going to shift, and again, I'm using my little trick. Opt-end -1. Opt-end is a variable that's set by getOps that says how many of these things have I processed. So I processed all these things, like let's say there was 3 options, and now I want to get rid of those. So I call shift, and I've left with my last option, because my last option is the directory you want to do this stuff in. Right? You guys follow that? Okay. And then I am left with the only option that should be on the command line is going to be the first thing now, because everything else is gone, $1. I said set the search directory to that value. And now I want to go ahead and just do it. Right? So I'm going to build a command. And first I have to calculate my start minutes, and that's using the formula that we talked about a little bit ago. And if you gave me an end date, I'm doing a little test here. This says if end date is not null, it's not an empty string, then I'm going to calculate this end minute using the same calculation, really. Right? Otherwise, I'm just going to make it 0. And here's what it does. Very end of it, I build this string. Now, because of the fact that I have things like a dash for a negative and a plus for a positive, I actually have to build the string and then execute the string, as opposed to just running this. So if you wonder why does he have the $ parentheses around all of this, and I've got echo all this stuff out and then run that, that's why. Hopefully you're following what I'm saying. So like if you just said run this and you said, oh, all right, I have this value and it's plus 5 or whatever it is, doesn't matter the value. It's going to go, oh, it's 5. It's going to convert it to 5. And then your script doesn't work and you scratch your head for a bit going, man, I should have started on this conference presentation earlier, right? Okay. So real quick, let me run this, just kind of show you. So I could say /between, and I want to start, I'll just say yesterday. Again, I'm going to use that natural language functionality of the date command. And I won't give it an end date. I'll just say from yesterday, in the current directory, tell me everything that was accessed. Okay, and it just gave me all these file names. Okay, and it's the current directory and below, by the way, if you didn't realize that. So I could say, what about things that have been modified? So I give it -m. And boom, I have only one file that's been modified. And that's the lock file for my presentation. Now, if we have a little time later, I'll show you how, one of the reasons that I like to use Linux for forensics is Linux comes with thousands and thousands of tools. That's reason number one. Reason number two, you can mount anything on Linux, any kind of file system. I mean, you could have a buddy, it's like, I had an old Amiga, and I got an image of the file system. You can find a driver for that stuff on Linux, right? It's out there. Somebody has made it. I can guarantee you that, right? So if you're doing Windows file systems, it don't matter. It's super easy to mount them, and then you can search through that. Now, of course, if it's a Windows file system and I'm trying to pipe this to another script, and there's all those spaces in there, it's going to be a problem. So what do? I'm just going to go back to my original, and I'm going to give it a -z, and you'll see that you can't see the nulls, but basically there's nulls separating all this stuff, right? All right, any questions on that so far? Cool. So if I go back here, let me talk a little bit about filtering those stuffs. So I already said I have a list of things that have accessed, created, or modified during a certain time range. That's kind of useful. Maybe I know about when a breach might have happened, and I care about files during that time, right, on my file system that's on my subject system. Well, maybe I care about what kinds of files. I might care about, hey, did they create an executable or access an executable? Do they create a picture file or a video file or an audio file? So how do I find that out? Well, there's another great utility, file. And guess what file does? It will tell you about files. That's all it does. Now, unlike Windows, Windows is really dumb about handling different kinds of files. You know, it says, what's the file extension? And you can hide information very easily on a Windows machine by changing the file extension. But of course, we don't want to use that. We're going to use file. So we'll run file on our output. And we're going to have another script that I call filter. So it's like, okay, I got stuff between these dates, and now I want to filter it. So the Linux operating system has this massive database of different file types just built into it. And for a lot of these file types, it'll go beyond just saying, hey, that's a Word document. It'll tell you what version of Word. It might tell you the author, the title, all kinds of other metadata. So it's pretty cool, right? So what do? In this little script, I'm going to read in options, and I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to build a regular expression for my find. So I'm going to do a file. I'm going to do a find, actually, in between. And then I'm going to do file. And then I'm going to do a grep on the results and say, hey, is this one of the kind of files that I care about? And that's pretty much what I'm going to do. So let me go ahead and hop back here and kind of show you this script. There's a couple little trips along the way. So again, shebang line, please run bin bash. Some comments, here's the different options. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's very easy to add your own. You know, if you said, I don't like Phil's list, or I want to add something. Get a file of that type, run file on it, see what it puts out, and go, oh, I'm going to key on that, and then just add it, right? So again, we have a usage, and here I'm going to say, here are your options. It's hard to see this. That's a -0, and that says input file names are null terminated. So that's on the input, and on the output, I use a -O. You might say, why didn't you use a -Z? Well, I thought, well, what if I want to use zip files? Then people would be like, what is, you know? So I'm like, I'll just use a -O. And then we have -N, PNGs, -J, JPEGs, G, GIFs, -I, just all of those images, -M, MPEGs, MP3s and 4s. F is a PDF. And then we have D, Microsoft document files, -X. That should have been Word files, but I think Microsoft Word docs, basically. X, Excel, and then H for help, right? Okay. So again, we have a starting point, and we say, I'm going to set my grep string to nothing. My output terminator is going to be a new line. Because if I'm not piping this to something else, I just want to print it out, that's probably good enough. And then once again, I'm going to do my while loop with get ops. And here what I'm doing is I'm adding to the string. So if you said, I want to know, PNG files, it's going to add PNG and then a vertical pipe, which means or. It's alternation in grep. And, I wanted to add JPEG. So I'm going to build this string. Now, there's a little problem, though. There's going to be a vertical pipe or an or at the end of my string. So how do I fix that? Well, the easiest way is to use this thing called Google. And you're like, there's all these cool things you can do to manipulate shell variables in Linux. Right? So like, if I just said $grep string, that works. That's that variable, right? The value in it. It's a little bit safer if I say $ and then in curly brackets, I say grepster. But if I use that safer full syntax, I can also do stuff like this. And everybody knows that : -1 is going to strip off that last character, right? Okay. Now you do. Or you could strip off 2 with : -2. And there are a lot of other things that you can do. So like if you've looked at some of the scripts, like even the shell scripts, Python scripts, like I have one that will find mismatched file extensions. And you can use tricks like this to get the file extension from a file name. Right? And honestly, I do not remember those things. I'm not doing that every day. So I'm like, I know I did this in another script, and if I can't figure out which script I did it in, I just Google it again, and I do it. Right? Okay. So now I have a little if statement, and I say if this is 0, so if this is a 0-length string, then while read file, and I'm going to do this, right? So I'm using that one trick. I'm capturing the response of the file command on my file name that was passed into me. And I say, okay, if I echo that response and I pipe that to egrep, now you might say, what do you mean egrep? You just said grep earlier, right? So egrep is the extended grep. And I always tell my students, look, if you're grepping anything that is not just a literal string, just use egrep. Because some of the things in your regular expression might be extended regular expression items. And it is too much trouble to try to remember, oh, that one's an extended regular expression item, which I'm pretty sure alternation is. But if you just use egrep, you don't have to think about it. Right? So I say egrep-q, that means quiet. I don't want any output at all. You might say, well, what's the point of that? Well, we'll find out pretty quick. So I'm going to do an egrep, and here's my regular expression, and then dash says, I'm not going to give you a file name. I'm going to just say, here's standard input. Just read standard in. Then I'm going to echo dash E. Please evaluate this. Don't put a new line at the end. And here it is. File, and then out term. So basically, it's just going to echo out your file name with your output terminator. Okay. If you gave me null terminated stuff, I do this slightly different loop. And here's all you really have to do to make this work. I change my read and I add this strange thing, -d, $, single quote, \0, single quote. Obviously, right? And again, it's one of those things where you're like, what? How do I do this? And you Google it and you're like, oh yeah, that's how you do that. I'm basically saying my delimiter is going to be a null, not just white space. Otherwise, you'll run it on your Linux box and it's like, hey, this works great. And then you go over to run it against, this image you've loaded of a Windows system, and it's like, whoa, why am I getting all these errors? You're getting all these errors because it had the spaces in there and it messed up your commands. That's why, right? And then we just echo out the results. So it's pretty much the same thing either way. So let's do a couple of quick examples. So I'm going to take my first, I'll just use this one. Things that were changed from yesterday. I'm going to pipe that to filter and, I'm sorry, accessed since yesterday. I'm probably not going to get a lot of stuff though. Well, we'll do it anyway. All right, so I'm going to say all images that were accessed since yesterday. And I also have to tell it, oh, by the way, my input was null terminated. And, I'm sorry. It would help if I put the right file name for my script. Okay, so I accessed 2 files since yesterday. One of them apparently a GIF, and the other one is apparently a JPEG, right? But are they really? That's the question. Right? So here's something that's kind of cool. So I wanted to show you what kind of output can you get from file, and I was actually kind of surprised by some of this. So if I do a file on everything in this little directory I have here, it comes up, and some of this stuff is not surprising. So here's my presentation. It's an open document presentation. Here's my born again shell script, which is also ASCII text, and it's executable. But this was a little bit surprising to me. Here's an image I have from a Windows box, and it says it's a DOS MBR boot sector, and it's a Microsoft master boot record, and guess what? It contains Windows XP for the English language. It detected that, and it went, oh, this is from an XP box. I'm like, oh, that's kind of impressive. It actually read the volume boot record, and it went, oh, it's XP. I've got some Python scripts, and if I look here, here's another image. It's DOS MBR boot sector, Microsoft MBR, Windows 7 English. I'm like, that's kind of cool. You know, it was able to figure that out just by looking at that file. So again, it's a lot more than just, oh, this is the kind of file it is. It's an image. It's telling you a lot more. And if I look at these files, is that GIF actually a GIF? Actually it is in this case, but sometimes it's not. And of course I have the aptly named safe to run executable. Definitely safe. You could run that all day long, right? But okay, if you guys want, I could kind of load up one of these images real quick and kind of show you how it would work against a Windows image, or you could say, nah, that's okay. I'm getting hungry, it's time for lunch. So does anyone want me to do that, or you just want me to skip it? You want to do it? Okay. So real quick, here's a Python script that I'm going to use. I'm going to run through this super quick. Python script, shebang line, imports a couple libraries for dealing with files, defines a class to interpret a master boot record, and it also has a bunch of little helper functions, so I can say, hey, is this partition active? What kind of thing is it? Blah, blah, blah. And in my main method, I basically read the master boot record, and I say, if it's a legit partition that I could mount, I'm going to build a mount command where I say mount it, and the options I give it are loop. Loop means I'm not a real device. I'm just a file trying to fake it. Read only. First rule of forensics is what? Round it, read writable, yeah. I always tell my students, first rule of forensics, don't change stuff, right? No A time. Do not update access times, please. Offset. Normally you mount an image or you mount a device. You're mounting a partition and you start at the beginning. We're mounting an image. We're not starting at the beginning. We're starting at the start sector, if you will. Also, by the way, if you've ever used like an older version of this script, just an FYI, they changed how this works with newer versions of Linux, newer kernels. So if there's more than one partition, and you just said, okay, here's where it starts, and that's all you said, it's going to fail when it tries to mount a second partition because it used to create a new loop device, and now it kind of reuses. And you'll get this weird error, overlapping, right? And the way you fix that is you add this option, size limit equals, and that's where I'm passing in the total sectors for that particular partition. Yes? Not here. You know, here I'm just like mounting it. Not really, because, well, and that's the other thing is we're talking about a file system image, not an image. But no, haven't done that. But okay, so I'll go ahead and just real quick, I'll mount, I don't know, XP or Windows 7. What do you guys feel like? XP, okay, I'll mount the XP one. So sudo, because I'm trying to mount something, /mount image.py, and that one was Cybermen. Who are the Cybermen? Doctor Who. Okay, and it told me about the partitions, and it went ahead and mounted it. Right, so boom, it's mounted. It's probably showing up down here somewheres, but I'm just gonna go to the directory where it's at. Well, actually, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna reference it. So I'm gonna start by saying, I want to find, let's see, that one, that's a little bit older. I would like to use my between script And my start date will be, we'll start with 2014 0801. And we'll say between then and -E, my end date will be 2015 01 01. All right, we'll see if we get any files. Nope. Okay. How about, oh, well, duh. I'd get more files if I gave it a directory, wouldn't I? Media, part 1. Okay. I'm like, wow, I really thought I had the right date range. Right? And of course, if I wanted to know how many files I got, I could pipe that to WC-L, and I got 20,000 files. Okay. All right. So now I might say I've got a lot of files that were touched. I could say how many of those were modified. I just change this, give it a -M. 12,000, right? It's getting smaller. What about created instead? Ooh, quite a few. We're going to go back to modified, right? And I'm going to give it this -Z option because, you know, those Windows people, right? They're going to mess me up. And now I'm going to send this to filter. So I'll say /filter. And how about images and PDF files? And I'm going to give it the -0, which means the input is null terminated. If I want the output to also be null terminated, then it would be -L. Okay. There we go. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit longer because it's not just listing the file names. But again, the cool thing about it is actually looking at the files. It's not just going, well, it says JPEG or JPG because, Windows 8.3 file names. But, and again, if I wanted to, I could pipe that to WC-L. And you'll notice I have a lot, don't I? I've got a lot of spaces in these paths. So if I didn't use that null terminated option, it would do something bad, right? It would just kind of mess up and I'd be like, why am I getting these errors? By the way, if you ever want to know, I kind of very briefly touched on how do you deal with stuff like that. A lot of commands in Linux will give you null terminated output if you ask for it. And then you can pipe it to something called xargs. And xargs lets you take things in standard in, basically, and pass them to commands that don't normally process that stuff. So it's just kind of something that you can do. All right, so I pretty much used my time. If you guys have any questions, I will entertain them. If not, I would say it's a good time for lunch.
Questions?
And I guess the next talk got canceled.
Next talk got canceled, so this room is free after a bit. We have time. We can go a little over. Actually, the next talk got moved to 4 p.m. on Saturday. So in your schedule, if you wanted to see Barry Suskin's tabletops, come back Saturday at 4 p.m. Any questions?
Yes. I have a GitHub. It's just really simple. It's like Polstra, Polstra, GitHub. You'll find my stuff. And I do have a bash forensics project I have not yet uploaded this because this is something I did like a couple weeks ago because I wasn't real proactive about my conference talk. But so yeah, it should be available.
Some people are still working on their talk today. You're fine.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions?
If not,
All right.
please thank the speaker.
Thanks
Remember,
for listening.